Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided by perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that all long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. Well, in this particular video, we've got to start off with the short range because we've got quite an active pattern across the United States. You're watching an infrared satellite animation here over the last 24 hours or so that shows some of the major features we're talking about. Some of the heavy rainfall that we received here across our southern region, looking back over the last 24 hours, came from this jet streak that moved right in through this area. Plenty of moisture pumped into the south side of it, and I'll show you how much rain fell. You can also see the large low pressure system that is sneaking across the Great Lakes states here toward the northeast, such that in the overnight hours tonight and into tomorrow will be a pretty powerful nor'easter that goes up the east coast of the U.S. A lot of wind, a lot of rain, and some snow at higher elevation. But for those of us in the midsection of the country that have had a couple of days here of drier weather, and we're going to get a couple of more, we can see what's coming into the Pacific Northwest. You can see the flow coming out of the southwest, so it's got a trajectory like this right now, but eventually the jet stream that is screaming across the North Pacific is going to be causing some problems in the midsection of the United States come next week. So let's take a look here now at our high resolution modeling. I'm going to just at least watch what we're expecting to see here in the next 60 hours or so. So the nor'easter that goes up here, there it is, into the northeastern United States. A lot of wind, very windy conditions, and quite a bit of precipitation with this one. And you can see the models trying to put in some snow in there at some of the higher elevations here in parts of New York. Meanwhile, on the back side of this, all the way across the rest of the country, we have a relatively quieter time period, but the only places we're anticipating having active weather is going to be as the jet streak comes in here into the northwest, and as we're watching this kind of pulse of tropical moisture, you'll see it there moving through the Gulf of Mexico and eventually toward parts of the southern region. So we're specifically Mississippi over to Alabama and eventually to South Carolina. Throughout the overnight hours on Friday, something to be watching here, we have this weak low that's off the page here that's up in parts of Manitoba. It will be draping a front that will be bringing some widely scattered showers into the north central plains, specifically North Dakota and Minnesota. But this again is all before kind of the bigger features come in. So just looking all the way out to Friday night, 7 p.m., this is what we're anticipating in terms of total accumulated precipitation. So we do have what seems to be a window here in the midsection of the country where, in addition to the drier weather we've seen in the last couple of days, we're going to continue to see a drier pattern at least for the next few days. But I want to show you at least what did fall out of that last system that came through. We can see that as it's been building up here, again, it'll become a big nor'easter in this area over the next 24 to 48 hours. Did drop quite a bit of rainfall in parts of Michigan and Wisconsin and then getting over into the Ohio River Valley. But the frontal boundary that was draped in through here, we saw over the last 3 days. Let me get rid of that line so you can see the numbers here. Some places down there in Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, even southern Georgia saw better than 3 to 6 inches of rainfall. And some of that rain fell on fields down here that have not seen rain in a very long time. So while we're happy to see the rain, this was a lot in a very short amount of time. So this is the issue we are dealing with. This really strong piece of the jet stream that stretches all the way from Japan clear to the west coast of the United States is complements of two major features in the North Pacific Ocean. The closest one is this deep trough here, which is cause for all the unsettled weather in the Pacific Northwest today and tomorrow. The second is this. That circulation you see right there is the remnants of Hagibis, the system we've been talking about now, what feels like for at least the last 15 days. It is what has got the jet stream really flying here, and whenever we see a strong Pacific jet stream, especially in the North Pacific, we know that the weather across the United States is going to be interesting to say the least. So what we're going to be focusing on here in the middle part of this video is, as this next system comes in, who's going to be getting the rain and potentially some snow, but most likely the rain from this system, and who's already too wet, and then again who's too dry. So this is looking back over the last 14 days, so our last 2 weeks, at the percent of normal precipitation. And I feel a bit like a broken record here, but it's this corridor right in through here that has seen in some locations here up to 500% of normal rainfall. Outside of that, yes, there are pockets of very heavy rainfall like you can see down here and elsewhere, but the idea is as we move toward what could be harvest, What will this next system do to kind of cause problems? Well, we have other issues to deal with before we even see that next system come through. And right now, where that snow fell here in parts of North Dakota, we've got somewhere in the vicinity of 2 to 3 inches of liquid equivalent in that snow, which means as it warms up, and it is going to warm up, take a look at this. It's going to play quickly, but these are overnight lows in the near term. This is Thursday morning lows. This is now Friday morning lows. See this? We've now got our warm air back in place here out ahead of this next big system as this ridge builds in the middle part of the country. Yes, it keeps us dry, but at the same time, it brings up those overnight low temperatures. And of course, the afternoon temperatures are above freezing. So we're going to go into a couple of days, maybe 3 days here of above normal temperatures, which means it's going to be the equivalent of getting a 3-inch rainfall because we've got all that water locked up in the snow. So all of that, of course, is going to continue to increase our flooding problems. This is from the USGS looking at our gauge network here. These are all the gauges that are currently at or above flood stage. So I'm thinking here about the rivers in eastern South Dakota. The Big Sioux, for example, we're going to be seeing some more water coming down. And then, of course, the Red River of the North is going to be getting a lot more of these gauges showing up in or on flood stage. And then this all does eventually come down into the Missouri River, so we could see some downstream effects of this with time. That's a lot of water coming down the pipeline here in the near term. And just to show you how saturated those soils are now this is in millimeters, so remember 100 millimeters is about 4 inches. So we have in some locations 4 to 6 inches of additional, so this is soil moisture anomaly, so this is additional moisture already in the soil. So adding to that, well, what's coming on the pipeline is this, okay? So if we play this forward, I'll pause it right about here. We need to be watching out for 2 things across the United States once we get rid of the nor'easter. First, the tropical pulse of moisture coming up into the southeast. I'll tell you how much rain to expect here in a few moments, but that's out ahead of our next weak low, which is now moving through parts of Manitoba by Saturday morning and over into Ontario. There will be a front drape to the south of it, and as a consequence, we could be bringing in some light precipitation out ahead of it, but the real show is still back here. You do notice that throughout the day on Saturday, a big push of that tropical moisture now coming into the far corner here of the southeastern United States. But what we need to be watching is by basically Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, and Sunday evening, what was once the disturbance called Hagibis is now being realized in the midsection of the United States. Now, this is what I don't like. By the time we get into Monday evening, the low pressure center has moved from Wyoming through South Dakota and is now sitting over Minnesota. And the back side of this appears to not be cold enough to bring more snow. Now, folks in the north central United States should be happy about that, except we are anticipating quite a bit of heavy rainfall. And that's been a major transition that the models have made with bringing a lot of rainfall here. But as you can see, it's all along the leading edge of this system that we're going to be seeing some heavy rainfall amounts potentially moving through soil that you just saw was quite saturated. So we see that system moving through, and behind it maybe a drier time period. I'll show you that in a few moments. But I want to show you some model differences here. On the left, I have the GFS. On the right, I have the ECMWF. So we're looking here at we're looking at mean sea level pressure. So the low pressure center that's right here in the GFS is lower than what we have over the ECMWF. But good thing is that the models have the same general picture for Sunday evening. Okay, that's what both of these images are valid for. Then what you're going to notice is this. On Monday evening, they're taking the low basically on a track that comes like this. Both models following a similar track, but again, look at how much stronger the GFS is than the ECMWF. Much stronger low pressure system out of the GFS model, much higher amplitude trough ridge system. And what that boils down to is this. So on the left, I have through the next 7 days from the GFS, total accumulated precipitation, and on the right I have the ECMWF. The differences in the structure of these storms in the models is best seen here. You see, these storm systems have what's called a dry slot. That's where the dry air feeds into the back side of them. I just drew the position of that dry slot on the GFS. Look at where it is on the ECMWF. It's a bit farther to the north. And the difference here is going to be felt in parts of Missouri and Illinois where the ECMWF is much wetter. But one of the things that these models do agree on is bringing in heavy rainfall back into this area, which is an area that doesn't need another drop. Other differences to think about. The GFS wants to keep the tropical disturbance a bit farther to the south and east. So you can see this pretty hard cutoff here where the heavier rain is going to stay in parts of southeastern Georgia, Alabama, and South Carolina. The European model is able to pull more of that moisture a bit into this system and also over that same area. So see these subtle differences in the models. They both are in pretty good agreement about the Pacific Northwest, though, picking up several inches of rain on the windward side of the mountains. So I really want you to see this, and this will be the main focal point of my video tomorrow morning, is to see what changes we got in our model runs to tell us which one of these is going to be the right scenario. Both are plausible at this point, okay? So major differences. Let's keep watching it throughout this week. Again, I just want to show you the National Hurricane Center gave this about a 50% chance at becoming a tropical depression. It doesn't matter. What it's doing is it's pumping in moisture into this corridor once it finally gets pulled into that bigger storm system that's moving through. So I just want you to see that. Now here is an interesting kind of end to this tale. Week 2 from both the GFS on the left and the European model over here on the right. At that time period, we see that, well, the midsection of the United States in through here and the Northwest is painted dry by both models. So we have this little break right now in the midsection of the country, but then a crazy end of the weekend and start of next week. But then following that, we may go back over into this drier pattern for a little while. And I have to sit here and ask myself why. To help understand that, I want you to see how temperatures have evolved, okay? So we're going to blend these two things together. First, before I give you that temperature discussion, take a look at this map. This is from October 1st through yesterday, the 15th, looking at all locations that got a temperature below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So this helps us understand where the frosts have occurred. I want to add to that a little bit more information though, and I'm going to show you now a map where I've colored in every location that's seen a temperature below 28. So now we start to see where that killing freeze has been across the United States. And to maybe even make this a little bit more clear, let's go back to this figure again. And I want you to now see this figure, again, temperatures below 32 degrees. And then I want you to look at this map, which now shows the hours below. Sorry about that. That should say below, not below. The hours spent below 32 degrees. So the frost event that happened from Texas through Oklahoma, Missouri, up into Illinois and Indiana, and then parts of the Ohio River Valley, and into southern Michigan, was a brief event. But we have got places back here in the northern and high plains that have spent more than 40, some locations up to 90 or even 100 hours below freezing. Again, this goes back to the first of the month, all right? So we've seen now where that hard freeze is located. Watch what the temperature pattern's doing here. We've discussed this in great detail. We know what's happening with this system coming through on Tuesday. But the models have been advertising that once we get out to the 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, that's what you're looking at here, that we may be going over into a pattern that brings in a more sizable ridge that comes into Greenland, a more sizable ridge that kind of goes up the west coast into western Canada, and maybe keeps a broader trough sitting here over the eastern United States. Now, what's the significance of this? The significance is primarily seen in the warm-up that will be happening here and the drier pattern that always happens when you go from a ridge to a downstream trough. There's upper level convergence in the flow of the jet stream, and that is not supportive of vertical motion. Now, I've seen this in the GFS, I've seen this in the European model, and it seems to be the way that the end of month is going. So that's why our temperature discussion is so important to think about with respect to precipitation as well, because the warm up along the western part of North America is what helps to dry out the central part of the U.S. So take a look at it here. Over the next 5 days, yes, we have this ridge building in as the next big trough feature swings in here, and the first trough that's sitting here exits out. That's that nor'easter. So this is the warm up causing the snow melt issues we talked about. In days 6 through 10, now the jet stream is careening through the midsection of the United States, making that big low pressure system that'll be here on Monday and Tuesday, and behind it the cold air is settling in. And that's why when we look out here into the 11 to 15 day time period, the ridge is out west, hence the warm up, and the deeper trough here is in place across the eastern half of the country. Now, just for the fun of it, okay, this is only for the fun of it, I'm going to show you an operational model run all the way out. This is a 366-hour forecast. We call this La La Land when we talk about weather forecasting. But it is the morning of Halloween. And we can see that the model's trying to throw a cold front that brings below freezing temperatures all the way into the southeast. Now, is this going to happen? Is it going to be cooler than average? Yes. But is this exactly what's going to happen? No, it's not going to happen. But I thought it'd be fun. I do know a bunch of kids watch my videos. So kids, listen up. I'm going to show you 2 quick, cool things. Do you see how there's little dots that show up here where the temperatures are warmer? That's called the urban heat island effect, where you have these cities, big cities like Atlanta right here, because the city is made up of, well, of glass and brick and asphalt and metal. Those materials tend to hang on to heat better, and we actually get this warming effect in and around them. So you can actually go in there and start to pick off some of the bigger cities in the southeast where this cold air is coming through. The second thing is, I at least want to show you, this is my 10-year-old daughter. Last year for Halloween, she went as a snowstorm. So maybe if this verifies, okay, and that's a big if, you might want to choose your Halloween costume wisely because it could be pretty cold there in the southeast and all points to the north of there. But by the way, just for the fun of it, since we're doing this is what I went to as Halloween a few years ago. This would not be a warm costume this year because I was wearing shorts Halloween a few years ago. Okay, let's get back into it. Now, when we think longer term, some of the stuff that I presented back in September was I was saying, we were seeing a forecast for drier conditions in this area. And I made a point to say that if it was wet in that area, that often meant that it was very wet in the midsection of the country. And I just did an analysis. We looked at these very wet October time periods, and we said, well, if it's wet here, it tends to also be wet there. So seeing the forecast showing up with drier conditions here, I said maybe there's a low chance of us being super wet in October. Now, we knew that the end of September and the beginning of October were going to be wet, but we may finally be seeing that correlation play out here as you look at the next 15 days in terms of precipitation anomalies. And what's driving that is the same thing we've been discussing for a while, the Indian Ocean Dipole event. So right now, look at my embedded figure up here. We're at one of the strongest positive phases of the Indian Ocean Dipole that we have on record, and that is forcing a wind to go in this direction. Now we can see that in the blues over here on this figure, but notice that with time they're expanding. And why I think that's important is we've seen this warm tongue of water showing up here for several weeks and months now. We've noticed that over the last week, that little pocket in through there has cooled down just a little bit. And I'm telling everybody in the video to watch this carefully with me. Because as that's cooled down, we've also seen a warm up of our waters right into this corridor. And why this is so important is this tells me that the Pacific Ocean, outside of the Indian Ocean Dipole event, is really kind of a bit wishy-washy on the teleconnection patterns. Therefore, predictability will continue to be low into the longer term. We can add to that this issue. We know that in midsummer, our global wind anomaly went below normal and has stayed there and in fact bottomed out recently. But we've noticed a little bit of a rise recently. But if the global wind anomaly stays below average, that tends to mean more ridging in the midsection of the country. And if that happens, well, that would give us a bit of a warmer and drier pattern into November. But look at this. This correlation is so weak we can almost ignore it, but I at least want you to know what we watch every day. Here's the other thing. I remember I telling you that we were in this inflection point with our global teleconnections. Well, we've seen that since the end of September, beginning of October, our Southern Oscillation Index on the whole has been rising. That would lead toward more ridging here across the western United States, which is actually lining up well with this current forecast. But again, these correlations are very, very weak at this point and don't hold much water, okay? So as a result of all of that, let me just at least cap off this longer range forecast by showing you the latest runs from the ECMWF looking out to the beginning of November. So this is the end of October, beginning of November here, and this is the first full week of November. We see that the models are keeping on that drier northwest and drier pattern in through this section of the United States, at least near average to slightly drier than average. But they tend to go right back over to a wetter pattern in this area once we get into November, and that's something we all need to be watching together. Because you've seen in the most recent forecast that anything I give you in the long range, I tell you it's speculative. I'm just looking for clues, and I'm trying to get better and better at doing it. But right now, those clues are a bit convoluted. So when we look at these global model output like you're looking at here, just remember, take it with a grain of salt as we watch these things evolve together. But that's why we release weather information 5 days a week, so that we can continually stay on top of it and do better at our 10 to 15 day planning. Okay? So I'll wrap this one up right here. Hope you found it informative and useful, but we'll talk to you again tomorrow morning with the latest updates on that big winter storm that's coming through the midsection of the country early next week. Have a great end to your week. We'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.